kindly ask you to start with your presentation and comments.
Marcus, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay, Marcus?
I can hear you okay, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Bon dia, buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. Again, thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us this morning. My initial comments, I have a few comments which will be supported by the slides. I'll present in English, and then I'll be happy to take questions in Spanish, English, or in Portuguese. On today's call, we would like to provide an overview of the following topics. The latest passenger and cargo figures that were revised recently, the effects on GDP and jobs in the region because of the ongoing crisis, the restart with regards to testing and quarantine, and then we'll go into a quick snapshot of the recent developments in Latin America and Caribbean. And as always, I'll be happy, or my team and I will be happy to take questions at the end of this session. As we look across the region, we're now heading into our 5th month of standstill in many of our countries. Latin America will be by far the region that has had the most restrictions and closure borders than any other region around the world. And while air service is beginning to be allowed to resume on a very limited scale, this by no means is enough to start moving us out of the crisis. Even on a global scale, the picture does not look much better. We now predict that the industry will only recover in 2024, 1 year later than we had originally estimated. As stated before, domestic travel will rebound first, followed by regional, and lastly, international long haul. But even the domestic travel will be affected and will not reach the 2019 levels before 2023. And then this, again, a caveat, as the current situation as today. Things can dramatically change over the coming weeks and months that would affect these forecasts. Traffic levels, our traffic figures for June 2020 show that the revenue passenger kilometers were down by 86.5% compared to last year. Traffic to, from, and within the region, Latin America and the Caribbean, was down 91.2% compared to 2019. Load factor wise, interesting in the region, topped the league with 66.6%, a clear sign that demand is there, but we need restrictions to be lifted to stimulate travel. Airlines in the region suffered a 96.6% demand drop in June compared to the same months last year, slightly up from the 98.1% drop in May. Capacity fell by 95.7% and load factors staggered at 17.7% percentage points to 66.2%, as I mentioned, which again is the highest amongst the regions. Compared to the passenger business, air cargo once again performed better. Overall demand in June was down by 17.6% year on year, with capacity shrinking by 34.4%. The capacity crunch is again due to large parts to the lack of belly space, which is normally available on passenger flights. Even though cargo flights to, from within Latin America and the Caribbean are operating, demand for this region shrank by a staggering 33.2%, the biggest contraction anywhere in the world. As a result, Latin American carriers posted 29.4% drop on year-on-year international demand, with capacity decreasing by 43.6%. Needless to say, the financial situation of the airlines in the regions remain critical, and relief measures from governments are urgently required. And I don't traditionally give the cargo facts, but I thought it would be important to provide them, because not only is COVID becoming a devastating determinator for our region, but also the economies of our countries are very quickly falling or shattering in this part of the world. But we all know that aviation is an engine for the economy and thus a catalyst for the social development of countries. It's not just flying, it's moving a country, a region, and a whole world. But with the continued restrictions on air travel in place, the economic effects on the major markets in the region continue to show a downward trend. And you can see the regional breakdown on the chart on the display. As an industry, we cannot afford to remain on the ground any longer. We have done our homework. We've been responsible in devising the necessary policies and procedures to protocols which will ensure that aviation does not become a vector for the transmission of COVID-19. However, in this part of the world, travel restrictions continue to be one of our key challenges. We need to learn to live with this virus. I've said it many times, we will have to coexist until a vaccine is developed. But most of the world remains closed with severe restrictions on movement, keeping travel and tourism, which is 10% of the global economy, in lockdown does not qualify as progress towards learning to live with the virus. People need to see government working together so they can safely get on with normal lives. For tens of millions, that means resuming jobs in the travel and tourism sector. And for the hundreds of millions, that means the ability to travel. This week, even the World Health Organization said that travel restrictions are not sustainable. We could not agree more. It is also becoming increasingly apparent that COVID-19 testing will need to play a role in facilitating travel. And while we're not suggesting that testing should be a blanket requirement for reopening, there are already tests that are accurate enough to be used to facilitate the relaxing of travel restrictions if they're taken within 24 to 48 hours before travelers head to the airport. And as tests become even faster and scalable, this could take place closer to the traveler's flight time in the vicinity of the airport. Governments need to move quickly and decisively to find alternatives to border closures, confidence destroying stop, and restarting and start restarting the opening and demand-killing quarantines. We need to learn to manage this risk of living with a COVID-19 with a targeted and predictable measure that will safely rebuild traveler confidence and shatter economies. Therefore, we renew our call to all the governments, particularly those in Latin America, to implement the takeoff guidance devised by ICAO, which will allow aviation to resume in a safe, responsible manner and without patchwork of restrictions. I do want to spend a few minutes on a bit closer on the individual developments in the countries. This past week, we had a meeting with the Minister of Transport in Argentina, a regular dialogue that we have with the minister on a monthly basis. International flights are still set to resume September 1, with the government indicating that some specific domestic air corridors could open in August, excluding Buenos Aires, which has the highest number of COVID-19 infections. In our discussions, due to the concerning situation of the number of cases in Buenos Aires, there is some concern from the sector that the restart in Argentina could possibly be delayed sometime. In Brazil, the government has announced the easing entry restrictions for foreign nationals, which should facilitate travel to one of the few countries in the region which never fully suspended aviation, but in one part of the country where air transport on an international scale was very inefficient, only being able to transport nationals or residents in either direction. In Peru, domestic air travel resumed this month, and hopefully, with the protocols in place and the success of the domestic reopening, we will be able to see an international reopening in August. Ecuador, which was the first country to resume operations or open its borders in our region, both into domestic and international flights back in June. However, this country continues to have the quarantine rules in place, thus hindering the demand stimulation that is required. In Colombia, we're calling the government to take the leadership role, the central government, Opening domestic air travel cannot be left in the hands of local mayors, especially in the case of the country's biggest airport, Bogota. Let us not forget that the overland buses have been allowed to resume services in Colombia, so aviation should be entitled to do the same. We have reached out to the mayor of Bogota's office for a meeting with the mayor, and we are still waiting. It has been, up to now, somewhat challenging to obtain a meeting with the local authorities to discuss the future of air transport in the near term. Costa Rica recently announced that it will be opening international service as of August 1st, which is good news for the country, which is very heavily reliant on tourism. Although that country will have, we'll call them corridors, in which traffic between the European community, the United Kingdom, and Canada will be permitted. In Mexico, we had a change at the top of the Ministry of Communications and Transport. We would like to thank the outgoing Minister Espriu for his support, and we are confident that we can establish a good working relationship with the new Minister, Díaz Leal. The aviation industry in Mexico needs to continue to grow. We need the government's support and leadership to continue to work for a successful restart in that country. And lastly, the Caribbean has seen the most reopenings across the region, although the imposition of new testing requirements or the short-term banning of arrivals of certain nationals is not helpful in restoring the travel confidence. Let me end by saying that I know that I'm beginning to sound a little bit like a broken record. Governments in the regions need to work with us to allow a restart of the industry. As I've said many times before, there is no industry that can survive 5 months at a standstill. The IATA guidance on safely restarting aviation is designed to manage the risk of reconnecting people and economies during COVID-19. Its multiple layers include testing and screening people prior to travel and measures to avoid the transmission in flight. And if governments can implement comprehensive contact tracing, we will be able to isolate and test to stop community spread from anybody that travels or others. Air transport is not a luxury for Latin America and the Caribbean. It is a necessity. And this industry has proven that over and over the past several years. Thank you very much. I'm very happy now and my team to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Gracias. Muito obrigado. So we will now start with the questions. And the first one is from Argentina. I think you've covered it a bit already in your remarks, but nevertheless. Bueno, la pregunta es, este lunes han mantenido una conversación con las autoridades aeronáuticas en Argentina. En la misma se planteó que la fecha inicial del 1 de septiembre para el retorno de vuelos puede ser demasiado optimista en virtud de los últimos registros de contagios en el país. ¿Cómo se enfrenta esto tenido en cuenta que la mayoría de las aerolíneas locales y extranjeras, incluido aerolíneas argentinas, ya tienen una programación prevista a partir de esta fecha? So this is basically relates to the comments Peter made on Argentina and how the industry would react if those flights planned as of September 1st might have to be postponed due to the, let's say, high COVID cases in Buenos Aires.
Okay, I'll start in Spanish and then I'll translate very quickly to English. Desde el inicio del COVID-19 siempre estuvimos al lado del gobierno en el sentido de la responsabilidad que tiene un gobierno para salvaguardar la salud, la seguridad de sus ciudadanos. Si el gobierno en esta ocasión, debido al alto número de casos que hay en la ciudad metropolitana de Buenos Aires, toma la decisión por el bienestar de sus ciudadanos, tiene que posponer el reinicio, no es algo que nosotros podemos combatir. Tenemos que apoyar la situación Nuevamente, lo que estamos pidiendo en el caso de Argentina, puntualmente, es la importancia de implementar los protocolos necesarios para que la industria, el gobierno, el sector esté listo para el reinicio de las operaciones. Tenemos confianza que los protocolos que tenemos, que se han establecido por la OACI, en lo cual Argentina es miembro signatario de la OACI, que ha contribuido al desarrollo del documento, que son medidas internacionales que se han aplicado en todas partes, pediríamos que el gobierno de Argentina hiciera lo mismo y que eso sea el vector, la dirección que sigamos para reabrir el transporte aéreo en ese país, tanto doméstico como internacional. ¿Que hay una probabilidad que se demore? Sí lo hay en estos momentos. Tendremos más información, esperemos que en unos 10 días es cuando se va a hacer un análisis profundo, y lo que hemos pedido al gobierno, si hay cualquier tipo de modificación a esa fecha, que es importante que se indique a la industria cuanto antes. I'll say very quickly, in the case that if the government makes a decision based on safeguarding the health of its citizens due to the high number of cases in Argentina, or more precisely Buenos Aires, it is something that the industry will certainly not push back on. From the very outset, the industry has been supportive to our governments in Latin America. First and foremost, public health, public safety is the number one agenda item. Saying that, the industry, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, has worked very responsibly, very collaboratively on a global scale to implement the ICAO protocols, the biosafety measures, in which Argentina is a signatory state of ICAO, has participated actively, and what we would ask of the Argentinian government is to implement these protocols in Argentina so the country, the industry, the sector is ready to restart. And we are confident that with the protocols that we have, that have been developed, that are been implemented in Europe, North America, and many parts around the world and the region, have shown that by successfully implementing these measures, we can certainly restart with confidence that the industry would not be a major vector, would not be a vector of the COVID-19. So from our standpoint, we need the government to ensure that the protocols are implemented as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And just to close off Argentina, I have another one which refers to the fact that the airlines are allowed to sell tickets at this stage, but are not allowed to kind of publish a schedule, if I understand this correctly. And maybe Maria Jose might be able to chime in from a local perspective. Here's the question in Spanish. La ANAC Argentina afirmó que no están autorizados los vuelos para septiembre, que solo pueden vender boletos. Las aerolíneas están desconcertadas. ¿Desde IATA tienen alguna definición o comentario al respecto?
Gracias, Marcos. Sí, esto se relaciona totalmente con la primera pregunta y con lo que acaba de decir Peter. No se están entregando lo que se llama factibilidades horarias para publicar los schedules, justamente porque todavía no están confirmado el inicio de operaciones a partir de septiembre. Está confirmada la comercialización, pero como todavía no está confirmado el inicio, por eso no están los permisos de factibilidad horaria. Una cosa está relacionada con la otra y es por eso que hemos pedido al gobierno que cuanto antes aclaren esta situación con respecto al comienzo de operaciones.
Okay.
¿Lo digo en inglés o...?
Just a quick if you want, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, this topic is totally related to what Peter and the previous question and what Peter explained. What the type of permissions to publish the schedules are called locally factibilidad horaria, granted by the airport, and these permits are not being granted because precisely it is not decided if operations are going to effectively commence or not as from September 1. It's the same situation, and this is why we are requesting the authority to, as soon as possible, clarify this matter.
Okay, thank you. And for all those, just Maria Jose Tevera is our country manager in Argentina. And with that, we move slightly north. We have a question from Brazil. If we have any update or comment on the promised financial support from BNDES, the Banco Público no Brasil. And I know, Peter, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, I think Danny could confirm, but my understanding is that we are still, or the airlines are still awaiting the transfer of the funds. There's discussions amongst the airlines and the government or the BNDES, but my understanding is it still has not occurred. I don't know, Danny, if something has changed in the last couple of days.
No, that's correct, Peter. This is Danny speaking. Well, it's a complex financial engineering, and right now, what the BNDES as well as airlines, they are saying and agreeing, it seems that for August and September would be the most expected date for the conclusion of this financial package.
Ok. Você pode repetir em português, por favor, para os jornalistas do Brasil?
Sim, claro. Bom, é uma engenharia financeira um pouco complexa e o que, junto com o BNDES e as empresas aéreas, por essa complexidade, estão trabalhando agora para uma solução em agosto ou setembro, mas vai ser algo nesse período, agosto ou setembro.
Okay, thank you. That was Danny de Oliveira, our country manager in Brazil. And so let's move on across the continent. This is a more general one in Spanish for Peter. Tras 5 meses, la mayoría de los países en América Latina, los gobiernos siguen cerrados y los aerolíneos se están quedando sin tiempo. Como IATA, ¿qué otras medidas y recomendaciones financieras se están llevando a cabo con las aerolíneas de la región que pueden apoyar a la recuperación y supervivencia de estas empresas? I guess this is a general one on government aid, support, relief measures that we need in the region.
Okay, I'll start in English and I'll start in Spanish in English. Okay. The one government measure that we need at this moment for our industry is that governments restart airline operations. In other words, eliminate the country restrictions and borders and let airplanes go back into the air. That is the number one request that we need at this time. The financial support is important. We have been working on these initiatives for several months now. Some countries, we have been more successful than others. But the number one request that the industry is making to our governments is not a financial request. It is a request to reinitiate airline operations throughout the region, domestic and international, as the rest of the world is doing. We understand the severity of the situation in our region. However, the situation has dramatically changed from an air transport standpoint, that today we have the protocols that will safeguard a safe and efficient restart of air travel, like it is being done in Europe, in Asia, and in other parts of the world. So that is our number one request, is for governments to remove the restrictions and to permit airlines to restart. I'll say in Spanish, la solicitud primaria que tenemos en este momento para nuestros gobiernos en la región no es una solicitud monetaria. La solicitud es que nuestros gobiernos, los gobiernos centrales, den la orden para reactivar, reiniciar el transporte aéreo en nuestra región, en nuestros países y entre nuestras ciudades. Eso es la parte más primordial que tenemos en estos momentos para que la industria, primera, pueda sobrevivir. Dos, para que pueda ser un partner que ayude a nuestros países a nivel social y económico reabrir de una manera responsable, eficaz. Lo piden nuestros ciudadanos en los países. El transporte aéreo es el medio de conectividad más segura, más eficiente que tenemos, y es el momento para reabrir. Tenemos los protocolos en estos momentos que no teníamos hace 4 meses, y esos protocolos nos permitirá para abrir de una manera segura y responsable.
Okay, thank you. I have a whole bunch of questions coming from Mexico relating to any contact that we've had with the new minister for communications and transport, also related to increasing of flights, and where do we stand on any government aid or support specifically in Mexico. Bueno, entonces tengo varias preguntas de los medios de México preguntando si hasta ahora ya hemos tenido contacto con el nuevo secretario de Comunicaciones y Transporte sobre reinicio de vuelos y también, bueno, ayuda de parte del gobierno. Entonces creo, Peter, y no sé si Quit quiere añadir una cosa más después.
Ok, muchas gracias. Marcos, si me permiten un momento, a la pregunta anterior, entrando en nuestro 5º mes, que nuevamente es más tiempo que cualquier otra región a nivel global, si continúa las restricciones o cierre de fronteras entrando a septiembre, octubre, tenemos posibilidad que una gran mayoría de nuestras líneas aéreas empiezan a desaparecer en nuestra región. Ya serían 6-7 meses de inoperatividad, y da igual qué tipo de negocio, en cualquier tipo de sector, si una fábrica, una empresa se mantiene cerrada durante periodos de esta magnitud, es muy difícil que cualquier tipo de empresa, mucho menos en un sector como el transporte aéreo tan complicado, pueda sobrevivir ese tipo de dimensión de tiempo. Just very quickly, I just wanted to reiterate what I said to the last question. We're now entering our 5th month. We are already hearing that countries may continue to impose their restrictions on air travel through September and October. That would take us into 6 and 7 months. There is no industry, no type of company, factory around the world that can be successful in which their operations are halted for 6 or 7 months without any sort of government aid, support. That can have a catastrophic impact on airlines based in our region, in which we could possibly see a large amount of airlines in those months be forced to close its operations. And undoubtedly, the international airlines that operate to our region would also probably be in a situation of having to cancel permanently operations into this region. And we've seen that with Air New Zealand into Buenos Aires, Argentina. We've seen that with Emirates into Chile. A la pregunta que viene sobre México, todavía no nos hemos reunido con el nuevo secretario Díaz Leal, ya le hemos escrito al secretario, estamos pendientes de una reunión con él y su equipo. Obviamente esperamos que la relación va a ser tan cordial como fue con el secretario Espriu. Tenemos una agenda que esperamos que se mantenga. Sobre las medidas de apoyo, no han cambiado. Esperamos que ahora con el nuevo secretario haya nuevas oportunidades para evaluar. También estamos mirando oportunidades de medidas de ayuda con los aeropuertos. Algunos han sido muy proactivos, otros menos, pero que estamos teniendo unas conversaciones muy efectivas en el último mes. Sobre la reactivación de los vuelos, sí hemos visto una buena reactivación del mercado en México, tanto a nivel compañías mexicanas como las internacionales. Las internacionales poco a poco están volviendo a la ciudad de México. El transporte aéreo doméstico también está incrementando, se está poniendo más capacidad. ¿Hemos llegado a los niveles de 2019? No, pero estamos viendo una pequeña recuperación en el mercado también, aunque todavía no estamos llegando a los números que esperaríamos que sean positivos. Pero sí hay una reactivación y poco a poco nos estamos moviendo en la dirección correcta.
Okay, do you want to just quickly do it in English?
Yeah. I'll say we have not met with the new minister, Secretary of Transport and Communications, Díaz Leal. We have written to the secretary. We hope to meet with him shortly. We do want to thank Secretary Espriu, who has been a big advocate for the industry, who's had open dialogues on a regular basis. We hope that will continue with the new secretary. With regards to the government aid, nothing has changed in that manner. That will be one of the main key items that we will pick up once we begin the dialogues with the new secretary. But I am happy to say that we are seeing an added interest on more support, financial support, particularly from the airport operators in Mexico. So we are quite happy about that. The last question was on the reactivation of flights. We are seeing some positive trends in Mexico. We're seeing the international flights slowly returning to the main entry points, Mexico City, Cancun, etc. And we see the Mexican carriers slowly increasing capacity within the Mexican market. So we are seeing a slow but positive trend of movements with reactivation of flights in that country.
Okay, I have a follow-on question from Mexico, specifically to bank guarantees, and the journalist is asking, el gobierno mexicano señaló que la banca de desarrollo daría las garantías para que las aerolíneas pidan créditos en los bancos privados como ayuda ante el coronavirus. ¿Sabemos algo sobre eso? ¿Tenemos algún comentario? Peter, and maybe
Peter, sí, Peter, si quieres, la tomo.
Sí, por favor.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenas tardes a todos. Sí, bueno, esto fue anunciado justamente casi en la última etapa del secretario Espriu. Sabemos que de alguna manera, en general, el gobierno lo que hizo a través de la banca y a través del Banco de México hace algunos meses fue ofrecer este tipo de garantías, ¿no? Que en su momento estarán analizando de manera uno a uno con las diferentes aerolíneas. Y bueno, esto es pues una parte que el gobierno puso ahí, que está en la mesa y que será decisión de cada una de las aerolíneas tomarlas como diferentes opciones. Por lo pronto nosotros hemos estado enfocados a empujar todos los demás apoyos y demás vertientes que ya había comentado Peter, ¿no? Pero básicamente es eso.
Okay, maybe I'll just do a quick summary in English. So the question was that it seems that the Mexican government has signaled its willingness to possibly have a guarantee by the State Development Bank, guarantee any private loans from private banks for airlines in order to survive the crisis. And our understanding is that this is on the table and being discussed in further details. But there's nothing definite as of yet, unless, Queet, you want to add anything in English to this.
Yeah, Marcus. No, I think that's pretty clear, Marcus. It's okay.
Okay. So thank you. And Queet is Quitlahua Gutierrez, our country manager in Mexico. And with that, we'll go slightly further south to Panama. I guess one came through WhatsApp. Just give me 2 seconds. Sorry. Okay. So Katiuska from Panama is asking us, Bueno, la situación financiera de las aerolíneas en la región y alivios, I think we've covered that, but maybe Peter wants to make one or two more comments. And then específicamente para Panamá, si hay algún avance de las conversaciones con Panamá luego que decidieron de volver a prorrogar el reinicio de los vuelos. No sé, Peter, si quieres hacer algún comentario sobre Panamá.
Okay. Sobre the question about the aid, right?
Yeah, the financial aid situation.
Bueno, sí. Alrededor del mundo, la cifra que estamos moviendo son alrededor de 130 mil millones de dólares que los gobiernos han dado a la industria para sobrevivir esta situación. La mayoría viene de Estados Unidos, que son alrededor de 60 mil millones. Hay un gran porcentaje de Europa. En América Latina es 1% de la cantidad total. Y como habían escuchado de nuestro compañero de Brasil, todavía estamos pendientes en el caso de Brasil, que sería la cantidad más grande. Así que realmente a nivel de apoyo financiero de nuestros estados en la región ha sido prácticamente nula, muy poca. Así que, y por eso tenemos los resultados que tenemos a nivel de líneas aéreas cerrando y del número de líneas aéreas que se están viendo obligados a acceder al capítulo 11 de la reorganización. Tenemos el mayor número de líneas aéreas en los dos lados, paros de operaciones y reorganizaciones a nivel global. Y una de las raíces fundamentales o primarias por esa razón es la falta de apoyo. En el caso de Panamá, estamos trabajando muy de cerca con nuestros socios estratégicos, como los llamamos, en los aeropuertos, el aeropuerto de Tocumen, trabajando conjuntamente para implementar los protocolos, trabajando con el gobierno, demostrando que lo que ha hecho la industria de una manera muy aliada para estar preparada para reactivar los vuelos cuando el gobierno nos dé ese permiso. No hemos recibido más información, la situación en Panamá también se ha agravado en las últimas semanas. Estamos totalmente coordinados con nuestros miembros, con Copa, el aeropuerto de Tocumen, trabajando de una manera muy estratégica para intentar ver qué opciones y alternativas tenemos para reabrir e intentar reabrir en estos momentos lo que está ya estipulado para principios de septiembre, lo que es el objetivo. Más que eso no tenemos.
Okay, gracias, Peter. I have one in English coming actually from Brazil, and it the journalist wants to know if we see any reluctance in governments in Latin America to actually reopen borders, especially with countries in Europe that are now seeing an increase in COVID cases again. So we're looking especially at Spain, which of course is a large market to and from Latin America, if we believe that this is going to push any reopening plans back further.
Okay. So in the case of, it's more of a focused situation. The United Kingdom implemented a 2-week quarantine on passengers or British passengers or residents who live in the UK who travel to Spain would have to quarantine for two weeks. It is not the measure that obviously we are requesting, particularly because the protocols are being put into place. However, there has not been a restriction of borders. People can still travel, but with a quarantine measure in place. We do have the EU, the European Community, has published a list of 14 countries that meet the accepted protocols for safe transport of passengers between countries. In this case, in our region, it's only Uruguay and Canada, where passengers can fly between those two countries and Europe without any sorts of restrictions or quarantine measures. The other countries, unfortunately, the borders are closed. And again, this is another example where we are pushing for the ICAO protocols to be implemented. We have many restrictions in our region as well. Many of the country borders are closed primarily due to restrictions on non-residents or non-citizens being permitted into the country. That is a situation that we have. That is one of the big challenges that the industry faces to restart.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And with that, we come from a question from Colombia on cómo evaluamos el plan piloto de transporte doméstico en Colombia. Hay avances sobre la apertura del aeropuerto de Bogotá. And I don't know if part of this you might want to also mention some of the comments we saw from the Minister of Transport today with regard to her declaring public transport as a very low-risk method. So maybe I'll just hand that back to you in Spanish. It's coming from City TV Bogotá.
Okay, thank you. Aquí hay una solicitud en Colombia. Los protocolos han sido desarrollados conjuntamente con la Aeronáutica Civil. El gobierno colombiano participó en el desarrollo de los protocolos que se han establecido a nivel mundial. Colombia era uno de pocos países de nuestra región que participó en el grupo de trabajo que desarrollaron esos procedimientos. Los protocolos han sido implementados por las líneas aéreas, han sido implementados por los aeropuertos. La industria está lista para reactivar en Colombia. Ha habido un gran número de vuelos y siguen día a día vuelos de repatriación al país con colombianos que han vuelto al país en aviones y no hay ningún tipo de cifras o data científica que ha demostrado que todos esos pasajeros que han vuelto al país han influido al incremento de los contagios en el país. Como dice la ministra, el transporte tanto terrestre como aéreo es fundamental, crítico para el bienestar social y económico del país. Dejar las decisiones a los municipios para reabrir los aeropuertos creemos que no es la manera más oportuna. De parte de la industria, hemos estado ya 2 semanas intentando reunirnos con la alcaldesa de Bogotá para tratar este tema, para explicarle el tema, para intentar trabajar conjuntamente el tema, para ver cuál es la mejor manera de reactivar el sector en el país. Hasta el momento, desafortunadamente, con la alcaldesa de Bogotá ha sido imposible obtener esta reunión. Esperamos que lo podamos obtener en corto plazo, hasta el punto que es la industria, los CEOs de las compañías, nosotros estaríamos dispuestos para estar con ella y explicarle la situación y la misma situación que nos encontramos también con otros alcaldes de otras ciudades importantes del país. Estamos dispuestos a mirar a vuelos pilotos desde Bogotá, desde las grandes ciudades, pero si no nos podemos reunir con los municipios, como nos había dicho el mismo presidente y la ministra, es difícil reactivar el transporte aéreo en el país. Y por eso, el punto de vista de la industria, como es en todos los países, una decisión de la reactivación tendría que venir del gobierno central. Y eso es la postura que tenemos en IATA, es una posición que mantenemos. La conectividad en el país está sufriendo, eso está impactando a los bienestar sociales y, más importante, hemos desarrollado e implementado y con el liderazgo de la Aeronáutica Civil colombiana tenemos los protocolos necesarios para reabrir.
Do you want to just do a quick summary in English for those who are not fluent in Spanish? I think it might be good for everyone to understand what is actually happening in Colombia.
Okay, thank you. So the situation in Colombia is we are at the hands of the municipalities to open air corridors or vuelos pilotos, however you want to call them, to restart air travel. The position of the industry, of IATA, of the airlines, has been Colombia was one of the few countries that was asked to participate on the working group that created, developed, and helped implement the ICAO biosafety protocols that are being applied in Europe, in Canada, in Asia, in the US. The Civil Aviation Authority of Colombia has implemented these protocols. The airport, the airlines that serve the country, that are based in the country, have acted responsibly, have worked collaboratively to ensure that we have the processes in place for a safe and reliable restart of air travel. The Minister of Transport has even said that ground transportation and air transportation is essential for Colombia. In our meetings with the government, with the president and the minister, we were told that we needed to meet with the mayors, with the municipalities, to look at the vuelo pilotos, these air corridors. We have now for several weeks been trying to obtain a meeting with the mayor of Bogota to sit down with her and explain what the industry has done to ensure that this industry will not be a vector of the COVID-19 virus. We want to show the mayor and other mayors that this industry has acted in a responsible manner with the help of the central government to develop and implement the right protocols and educate them that industry is a safe means of air travel, of transportation. Unfortunately, up to now, we have been unable to meet with the mayor of Bogota. Her agenda apparently is very busy and is unable to meet with one of the strategic partners that brings social, good and economic benefits to her city, is unable to meet with us. And we've had some success, but very little, but not the success we would expect with some of the other larger cities and municipalities to discuss. So when we are told by the government that we need to meet with the municipalities to look into these flights, and the municipalities do not give us the time to meet, this is why we have been reiterating that, like in most countries, the decision of reactivating air travel has to be a central government role and not left to the local government.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. I think that was a good clarification. So we have several questions coming back to the economic impact on the various countries. So we've just put the slide back up. I know the impact on revenues, on the industry, on the wider economy to be explained. Do you want me just to go through it quickly, or do you want to do that, Peter?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So, and as I said before to everyone, the presentation will be available by email to everyone. So anyhow, the impact on revenues is the actual amount of revenue for flights in, out, and within that country that we are foreseeing due to the closure. So this is the amount of revenue that will be lost versus 2019 during the course of this year. The impact on the aviation industry. So this is basically the impact, the GDP contribution that aviation makes on the local economy that we are seeing in danger for this year. The number of jobs that could be affected by the impact. And then the wider economy is along the entire travel value chain. So hotels, conferences, etc., anything that is directly related to aviation in the value chain, how this could be affected financially for 2020. Entonces lo voy a intentar rápidamente en español. Bueno, el impacto on revenues es el impacto sobre los ingresos por cada país. Entonces, los ingresos que generan las compañías aéreas con sus vuelos desde, hasta y dentro de estos países, la reducción de ingresos en comparación con el año 2019, el impact on aviation industry es el impacto de la contribución al PIB que aporte la aviación por cada país, la reducción que vemos en este año, los empleos directos de la aviación que están en riesgo en estos países, y el impact on wider economy es la contribución al PIB de toda la cadena de valor de la aviación. Entonces, hoteles, turismo, comercios, etcétera, que dependen de la aviación y el impacto que prevemos en este año comparado al año anterior. And with that, I will check if there's any further questions in the chat as we are coming to the close of the hour. I'm hearing that there is another question. So, Christian, if you want to pose that question, please.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'll just ask you here to be faster, okay?
Okay.
The last report from you was estimative of loss of 10.2 billion in Brazil. Is that right?
I have to look at the latest figure, the ones from before. But yes, these basically the figures have worsened because the shutdown. It's been updated. Yes, because the shutdown has been lasting longer. So of course, with the longer shutdown, we expect a further decline in the contribution.
Okay, thank you. That was my doubt. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okie doke. Okie doke. I think unless we have any further questions, I don't know. Peter, do you want to make a final comment before we close the session?
Well, Lars, can you go back to the slide before? No, the countries, the impact that Marcus just explained. Okay, then. As Marcus very well explained, I just want, as we leave, and you've heard me this morning talk about restart, how important it is, how difficult the situation is becoming for the industry in terms of survivability if we go into 6 or 7 months with closures, how slowly countries are reactivating, how slowly they're implementing protocols and not using the globally accepted protocols. We have two situations here. One is safeguarding our citizens, family members in our region, in our countries in Latin America. And the other part is the devastating impact that this epidemic, this crisis, is having on our economies. Our economies in our regions were already struggling before COVID. And when you look at the impact in terms of billions of dollars and millions of jobs that are being impacted, both directly and indirectly, and how important travel and tourism plays into our families in the region, this is a matter that we need governments to become much more responsible. We're not asking to act recklessly. We're asking that we should be acting responsibly. The industry has developed protocols that are responsible, that will be safe, that have been worked on a global scale, that have been worked with each of the governments in the region, that have been implemented by the airlines and the airports. The World Health Organization is happy with those protocols, is asking governments to restart. And we need now to learn how to coexist with this virus. A vaccine will not be available for many, many months. Our nations, our citizens, cannot continue to have air transport grounded. People need to move for personal reasons, for work reasons, or for financial reasons. And unless we're able to activate our air transport sector quickly, we are going to find ourselves in a very different scenario in a very short time, where the landscape of the airline business will be very, very different, and the impact of jobs will not be growing, but will be decreasing in an alarming rate. And that will be an additional problem to our governments. So I ask the government in our region, let us help you, both from a social and from an economic standpoint. Restart your countries. We will act in a responsible manner. The protocols have been put in place, and it is time, as the rest of the world is doing, to do the same. Muchas gracias.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. And with that, we will come to a close of today's call. Thank you again for everyone for participating.